It is Ryan Cameron Uncensored, and we're very happy to have on the line with us right now Secretary Buttigieg of these United States. And there's some breaking things going on with the transportation infrastructure. Before we dive into the money that's been, given out around the country, kind of speak to the people who have been left behind and why this is so important, Secretary.
Well, one thing we know is that over the years, infrastructure spending in this country has often left communities out or sometimes even made them worse off. Look, the whole point of transportation is to connect. And yet, in many cases, especially the way highways were built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, those pieces of transportation have also served to divide. The fact that we have in English this expression of the wrong side of the tracks tells you everything you need to know about how these divisions shaped up, often along racial lines. We have an opportunity to change that. That's what's so exciting about this news. As part of the Biden infrastructure plan, we have $3.3 billion that we have announced going out to communities around the country to help reconnect where there had been division in the past. That means if a highway tore through neighborhoods, often Black neighborhoods, eliminating them or cutting them off from downtown, we in some places are able to put a cap over that freeway, reconnecting those neighborhoods and creating new connections and new lands. In other areas, it's the overburdened and underserved neighborhoods that have not had adequate transit connections. So in places from Chicago to Philadelphia, we're investing in transit to better link people up. Bottom line is we know that fairness has to be at the core of how we spend infrastructure dollars today. The president expects it, the public expects it, and that's what we're working on right now.
So what does it mean for, us here in Atlanta? Because I know I've heard about the stitch and the $158 million that we're going to be receiving. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so Atlanta has a classic example of this kind of infrastructure that gets in the way with the way that the downtown connector, I-75 and I-85, cut through a very important part of the community. The reason this project is called the Stitch is it's going to put a cap over those highways so that there's, in effect, new land on top. The cars can still move, but they no longer separate one part of town from another. And we think that's going to mean a lot to Black communities. It's going to mean a lot to the entire community. It takes funding for sure, which is why it couldn't happen without this $158 million that we are directing to help support this project. But I do want to emphasize the vision for the project came from the community. We didn't invent this here in Washington. We know that the best ideas aren't going to come from Washington. More of the funding should. That's what this program is all about, getting out the funding to get this community vision to turn into reality.
Secretary, what are some of the things that you are most proud about, in this current administration? Some things that you personally have kind of had on your list of things to accomplish that you kind of went out and got done?
Well, a big part of it is this kind of work. We pushed so hard to try to make sure that the next generation of building highways and railways is done with fairness in mind in a way that did not happen in the last generation. And that's true in large communities like Atlanta. It's true for rural communities. I was in a different part of Georgia, Millen, Georgia, which is basically cut off by this railroad crossing where trains get backed up for hours a day. That's not just a convenience issue, that's a safety issue. Ambulances can be stuck waiting for that train. And we're bringing funding to address that and make sure that it's possible to get across that railway. So whether it's major projects like the Stitch in Atlanta, also funding for the Beltline, funding for MARTA, that 5 Points station, that area that's needed a lot of work. We're putting these dollars where we know they are needed most, and I'm proud of that. But it's part of a bigger agenda, which is to make sure transportation works for people in everyday life. And whether we're pushing the airlines to make sure they treat airline passengers better, or whether we're protecting communities' civil rights when there's a proposal for a highway to come through that community, all of it's part of that bigger picture of making the most of our department's power to stand up for people who count on us to protect them.
I'm glad you kind of brought up one final question here about some of the things that we've been hearing about with some of the airlines and some of the missteps. And, how is the Transportation Administration kind of addressing that head on? Because now there's hashtags going out. If it's Boeing, I'm not going. It's all kinds of things where people are kind of worried. And the transportation business of getting up and going on a plane is a really big business in America. How do we address that?
Yeah, this is a big deal for America. It's a big deal for Atlanta, of course, one of the busiest airports in the world. And our focus is always on safety. We have to work hard to make sure that flying remains the safest way to travel in the world. By the way, right now it is. That remains the case. But we are troubled by some of what we've seen at Boeing and at some of these incidents, which is why we've put Boeing under a microscope. FAA is holding them to an exceptionally high standard because we need to make sure that it's 1,000% safe. And every time I get on a plane, which is every few days, I'll be doing it again today, and especially every time I get on a plane with my kids, I want to know that we've continued to do everything we can to maintain that safety record. But it's not just about air travel, which, despite the headlines, remains the safest way to travel in the world, and we're pushing hard to keep it that way. We also need to do more on roadway safety. We lose about 40,000 lives a year to roadway crashes. It's about the same number as gun violence, but it gets far less attention. We need to take steps with safer roadway designs, safer vehicles to address that. By the way, it's disproportionately hitting cyclists and pedestrians, and it's disproportionately hitting Black and brown communities. So again, we know that funding is part of the answer. We can fund safer road designs, we can fund safer neighborhoods, and we're doing that with these dollars out of the Biden infrastructure plan.
Secretary Buttigieg, we appreciate the time, great information, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
All right.